Start. You ready? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our Cooking with Ryan and Ellen again. But where's Ryan? Anyone seen Ryan? You seen Ryan? Well, I guess it's just me today, so bear with me, okay? We are filming here at the Senior Resource Center, and we have opened to our congregate dining. We do have two of our participants here that are sitting in with us today. And thank you out there that have come in to Zoom with us. All right, we're going to be talking about food labels to begin with. Everyone familiar, I'm sure, with packages and the food labels. We're always looking to see, how many calories are in it, what a serving size is. And actually, the new label is a little bit different because it does tell you in larger bold print what that serving size is and how many calories. Okay. So, but what I want to focus on today is the new dietary guidelines that came out just recently for 2020 to 2025. And it's been identified that most Americans do not get enough of 4 nutrients. And those 4 nutrients are calcium, vitamin D, potassium, and iron. Okay, and those are all very important. So if you're out there and you have a label, a food label handy, you might want to pull one up, and we're going to look at this a little bit. So I have 2 ladies here, and they have a couple of items. Okay, and so we're going to look at the food label and see what the percentage of those nutrients are. So we have cannellini beans. And Anna, you were saying that you use these a lot at home. Okay, all right. And you use them in place of meat. Yeah. Okay. That's excellent. So it is a very good protein source, but it's also very good for iron. It has 10% of your daily requirement for iron in it. So that's really good. Okay, it also has 10% of potassium. So that's kind of a double whammy there. Very good. Okay, and Mary, you have some raisins here. Let's see. Again, this is on the lower part of the label. Okay, the lower section. This is something that's been added in the not too recent past, but primarily raisins, okay, dried fruit, they typically do have a fair amount of iron in them, and we know that raisins do. And it has 4% of your daily intake. And actually for potassium has 210 milligrams, which is pretty good. That's 6% of your daily intake, what your daily intake should be. So another good source. Okay. So it's always good to look at that section as well as the other sections too. But knowing that most of us don't get enough of those nutrients, that's really something to focus on. So today with our cooking, I thought that, and I typically am looking at something very nutritious. You all can attest to that. They watch my cooking shows or demonstrations usually once a month. But today I'm kind of veering away from that just a little bit because I do want to focus on calcium, vitamin D, and potassium. And one ingredient or one food source that has all those ingredients is milk. So today we're going to do a couple of recipes using milk. Our first recipe is stovetop macaroni and cheese. I would have never thought I would be fixing macaroni and cheese. I did try it once here a few years ago. I thought I would try a low-fat macaroni and cheese. There's no such thing. That really tastes good. So I kind of learned in my older age, my older years, that some things you just have to keep the way they are. Okay, but something like macaroni and cheese, it's a very southern dish. You might want to limit the frequency that you have it, because we do know that with the cheese that's in it, that can have a lot of cheese in it. that can have a lot of calories, a lot of fat, cholesterol. Okay. So if you limit the frequency and maybe the portion, okay, then you're better off. So anyway, this recipe here, it makes its own sauce in the stovetop, which is on the stove, which is really pretty cool. So we will post this recipe afterwards. But you start out with milk. We're not cooking the dried pasta in water. We're actually cooking it in milk. And as it cooks, the starch from the pasta and the milk make its own sauce. So it's pretty cool. So this recipe calls for to begin with 2 cups of milk. And then as it cooks, if you do need to add more milk, you can. I'm gonna get my gloves on here. I just don't know what happened to that Ryan. I'll get him next month, okay? Actually, he's a very busy man, and he agreed to do next month. All right, so we have our 2 cups of milk in here. I am using 2%. Typically, I would perhaps use a 1% or skim, but for something like the macaroni and cheese. And then if you just put your 2 cups of pasta in here. Certainly you can use whole grain pasta, a tricolor pasta. We're making this traditional, so it is just your regular pasta. So we're going to start out high temp. Once it starts simmering, then we will turn it down. And the key is to let it simmer first until the pasta is al dente. Give it a quick stir there. All right, so I'm going to let that start up here. And then I'm going to start shredding the cheese. This recipe for 2 cups of pasta only calls for 1 cup of cheese. A lot of people would probably put more in, but if you use a sharp cheddar, which has a more intense flavor to it, actually use less. So that's what we're going for here today. I like to use the chunk cheese rather than the already grated cheese. It's fresher this way when you grate it yourself. Now, you don't have the time to do that. You can certainly get the grated, but to me, this is a fresher product. So we need, as I said, 1 cup of this. I'm just going to grate this and keep my eye on the pan here. If you've ever cooked with an induction cooker, it really cooks quickly. It gets up to a high temp pretty quickly. Now you could use any cheese in this, but again, like I said, I like the sharp because again, it has more intense flavor. Okay, so you might be tempted to grate more, but it really has I think, great flavor with the 1 cup. See, I got the word just a little bit here. I found this recipe online, and there was another one that also had a little bit of butter in it, which did give it a little bit more of a creamier sauce. One thing about cooking in milk, it does want to stick on the bottom, so you do want to stir it frequently. And the tea will help stuff that we look for. Once adjusted, the picture is automatic. I'm gonna try that on that setting. Good. So we have our cheese ready to go. Okay, other additions to this, very simple. This recipe in particular, this calls for a little bit of mustard, with a little pizzazz, and actually smoked paprika, which, have you ever tried smoked paprika? Got a really cool scent. You want to smell it? Yeah.
What is it?
Smoked paprika.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's good.
So we're gonna add a little bit of that. Okay, so as this is, check it here. You know what they say about a watched pot? What do they say, ladies? Never boils, does it? All right, now, the second dish that we're going to make today, again, using milk, is one of my favorite comfort foods, especially after a long day. I do get a good balanced dinner, but a lot of times after dinner, I want that little extra something. You ever feel that way? Yes. Something more? Okay. So we're gonna make pudding in a cup. So ingredients I have here, again, it's a very simple recipe. And really all you need is a bowl, a microwave, and a few simple ingredients. Right? So we're gonna start with that. So I like to use the bittersweet chocolates. Again, they don't have as much sugar as other chocolates. And this is 50% cocoa bean, so it has, again, a more intense flavor. So you can get more flavor with less. And actually, we're only going to use a quarter cup. And actually, we're making a cup of pudding here, so 2 servings. And I do tend to keep a bag of these at home, not just for pudding, but because of the size of them, the morsels, they make for a good snack. If you want that little bit of chocolate, but yet you know that if you have a candy bar, you eat the whole thing. Here you can just have a few and get that satisfaction. As we're getting along on that, I'm going to continue to stir this on occasion. All right. So along with the chocolate chips, I'm going to add some cornstarch for thickening. And also going to add some sugar. And the sugar in the recipe that you have and that we will post actually calls for a tablespoon, but that's way more than you need. I find that a teaspoon per serving, per half cup serving, that's plenty. Okay. And if you want to, you know, if you're someone that uses artificial sweeteners, you could certainly add a little bit of that. But really, the milk has sugar in it, and so you really don't need that much. We're making 2 servings, so 2 teaspoons. And then for the thickener, the cornstarch, it's 2 teaspoons per serving. The nice thing about cornstarch is that it dissolves very easily. For those of you who cook with it, you know, like if you're making a gravy or something. Whereas flour can lump, the cornstarch doesn't want to. Check our pasta here. So we want- Now, just a dash of salt, just a pinch, not a dash, a pinch of salt. Thing with salt, you do want to be very cautious with the amount, you know, that we have in our diet. We as Americans usually consume a lot more than we need. A little bit of salt can bring out flavor in food, so sometimes you need salt. Okay, then we add the milk. And again, we're adding a cup of milk because we're making 2 servings. And stir that up. All right, and go over to our handy dandy microwave. Cook it first for 1 minute. Typically, if you're doing the 1 serving, I would suggest putting it on a minute, and even after 30 seconds, check it, stir it. This really doesn't take any time at all. So we're doing 2 servings a little bit. So with the milk, as I mentioned, this is 2%. You could use a different fat content milk. You could use soy milk, lactate milk if you're lactose intolerant. So certainly can use a variety of other milks. One thing to note about the different variety of milks is that really soy milk is the only plant-based milk that has the amount of protein in it that cow's milk does. Almond milk is very popular, but it doesn't have nearly the amount of protein. So if you're looking for protein in your milk, you might want to not go with like the rice milk, and that's very low. Okay, so you can see the chocolate's beginning to melt. It's not getting thick yet, but trust me, it will. Put it on in a minute, but I'm going to check it after 30 seconds and see how it's doing. This is looking really nice here. I think we're going to have music along with our cooking. That's a great addition there. As I was mentioning about the alternative macaroni and cheese recipe, there is one that does have a little bit of butter in it. I am going to add just a little bit, just to give it that little extra touch of richness to it. So when we add the cheese and the rest of the ingredients, we'll add a little bit of butter to it. This is the point of the pudding, but I do like to kind of watch it because once it starts bubbling, you do not want it to bubble over. Have you had that happen at home? Anything in the microwave, like oatmeal, pretty
Mhm.
sticky?
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's starting to get thick, okay? So probably another half a minute or so, and we will be ready. Very excited to be doing this in this part of our dining room, our Ohana Cafe here. Now that we're back open again, it's nice to be able to have participants here as well as online.
We've got 2 that joined us today virtually.
Okay. Oh. I was talking, wasn't I?
Mhm.
It's kind of an attractive cup, but it did go over a little bit. I've learned I really can't do 2 things at one time. Just get that back in there. But we have pudding. We have pudding in a mug. We're gonna let that cool a little bit, and that will be our dessert. As you can see, nice consistency. Of course, that will thicken as it cools. Yeah. They get it ready for you too before you leave. Okay. So it looks like it might be ready, but I'm gonna just taste a piece here and see. Don't want it overcooked, but want it. A little bit longer. So when we're thinking about calcium, vitamin D, potassium, and iron, some good sources for the calcium is for sure milk products. Also, like canned fish that have the bones in them, like salmon, sardines. As long as you mash up the bones and mix it in, and actually you can do that. That's a really good source of calcium. There's vitamin D. You can go outside and get vitamin D. Your body converts it. It's often fortified in milk, vitamin D, milk, you hear that. There are other sources. Cod liver oil, remember growing up, cod liver oil. Potassium, you can usually find that in a good portion of your fruits and vegetables. Sweet potatoes, powerhouse food, I always like to say, a lot of potassium as well as other nutrients. Potatoes, bananas, citrus fruit. Okay, so this is ready. I'm going to add that bit of butter. Let's take a squeeze of custard. These items right here are certainly optional depending on your food preference. It does call for some salt. Again, this could be variable with what you. This is a quarter teaspoon. I love black pepper, cracked black pepper. And then the smoked paprika. So this recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon. So it's gonna sprinkle a bit in. We can always add a little bit more, but we can't take out. So we'll try that. First, the cheese. Okay. So that's mixing well. I think we could add just a wee bit more milk, give it a little bit more creaminess. Plate. Okay, so you can see it is very creamy. Again, that was only 1 cup of cheese. Very creamy. To go along with that, maybe some steamed broccoli, get some color, extra color on that. Maybe a fruit of some kind, maybe a citrus fruit to get your potassium in there. And then you have a complete meal. And then, of course, we have our pudding for dessert. Ladies, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Wish I could send some home with you. You are welcome, Pat. So we've got the pudding here. And actually, Pat knows we have new mint in our garden. So I'm going to garnish our chocolate pudding with some mint. You will want to let that cool a little bit before you taste it. Kind of hard to place things when you have gloves on.
Hey, you have a great day, Ellen.
Thanks. You too, Pat. Thank you. All right. So again, thinking about that food label and just checking it out, look at foods, look at those labels, make sure, not only are we looking at the top section there where you're watching the sodium and the cholesterol, the fat, the grams of sugar, but look at that lower section, whereas you should be getting more of that. There's a 5-20 rule that for the top section, for the cholesterol, the fat, the sugar, the salt, ideally, the label has less than 5% of your daily intake. And then in that bottom section with the vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium, you have at least 20%. That makes a really good food if it meets that 5-20 criteria. Well, thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to Ryan's cooking with you next month. Thank you.